What was Christmas like in rural Plains in Archer, Georgia, the hometown of Jimmy Carter, in the depths of the Depression? How did the white and black families in rural Georgia celebrate Christmas? And how did his 12-year-old daughter, Amy Carter, influence Christmas when her father was president? What was Jimmy Carter's favorite Christmas after he left the White House? Please, we welcome interesting questions in the comments. Let us learn and reflect together. At the end of our talk, we'll discuss the sources used for this video. Please feel free to follow along in the PowerPoint script we uploaded to SlideShare, which includes illustrations. Our sister blog includes footnotes, and both include our Amazon book links. Jimmy Carter reminisces. Our family moved from Plains to the farm in 1928 when I was 4 years old. U.S. Highway 280, then a narrow dirt road, was 50 feet in front of our house, a modest structure whose plans had been provided by Sears Roebuck. Paralleling the road was a Seaboard Airline Railway, heavily traveled in those days by both passenger and freight trains. Jimmy Carter continues, but now everything has changed. There's usually only one train a day, and most of the people have moved away. With the coming of modern transportation and the legal end of racial segregation, people have gone their separate ways, and the intimacy between black and white folks has disappeared. Jimmy Carter grew up on his family farm in Archery, Georgia, several miles from Plains. He remembers, in those early days, all my close neighbors were black families. Their children were my intimate friends with whom I played, fought, fished, hunted, and worked with in the cotton and peanut fields that were owned by my father. When he went into town to sell peanuts, and when he started school, he felt that he was in an alien environment in Plains, away from my black friends. The Great Depression was a time of almost incredible poverty, not only in rural Georgia, but all over the country. Although my father was a landowner, cash money was scarce for us and for everyone else. Land seemed to have the only permanent economic value, and hard work was the key to survival. The celebration of Christmas during these times was quite different from what we know today. Much more frugal, but with a degree of personal intimacy that brings back warm recollections. And the biggest difference between Christmas in rural Georgia during the Depression and today's celebrations was that in rural Georgia all the Christmas decorations were homemade, as were many of the Christmas presents. Jimmy Carter recalls, throughout the year, Daddy and I were on the lookout in the woods for a relatively wild red cedar that would make a great Christmas tree, one that was perfect in size and shape. Even without electricity, the decorations could be beautiful. We children would paint different colored magnolia leaves at school, and these were mixed with green leaves and red berries and holly to decorate our mantelpiece, tabletops, and around the base of the tree. We made Christmas tree decorations in our school classrooms, which included long chains of circled and glued paper strips of different colors, plus ropes of popcorn or cranberries strung on long, slender threads to wrap around the tree, plus homemade ornaments and tinsel cut from the tinfoil in cigarette packs. All of us were proud to learn how to make a perfect five-pointed star with one scissor snip if the heavy paper was folded correctly, and then we covered it with tinfoil. Jimmy Carter fondly remembers, my most memorable Christmas morning was when I found just 2 oranges, some English walnuts, dried raisins, and a pair of trousers. Trying not to appear frantic or disappointed, I searched all around the tree and attempted to control my trembling lips and to hold back tears, as I considered myself too old to cry. But after a few moments, Daddy said, "Sometimes I think old Santa might leave something out in the yard." And I looked out of the living room window. There, outside, with her reins tied to a tree limb, was a Shetland pony. In other years, Jimmy Carter often received books as presents, one year receiving a 20-plus volume set of books. But Jimmy Carter remembered, we Carter children expected and usually received some nice presents on Christmas, and sometimes it was embarrassing to compare mine with those of my black playmates. There was no doubt that they also believed in Santa Claus, but their expectations were much lower. With annual incomes of just $300 or so to buy food, clothing, medical care, and all the other necessities for an entire family, their Christmases lacked any such luxuries as store-bought toys or presents. But Jimmy and his siblings shared their playthings when playing with their black friends. Jimmy Carter remembers, usually the black children had individual shoe boxes labeled with their names, carefully saved from one season to another. These would be placed side by side near the fireplace, and an outstanding Christmas morning would bring an orange or an apple or some raisins. A little boy might get a toy made by his father, and a girl usually expected a homemade doll, with corn shucks or wheat straw making up its main structure. And Jimmy remembered how their black tenant farmers could buy small toys in the Carter store next to their house that cost a dime or less. Now, for the first 3 years of his presidency, the Carters spent the Christmas holidays at Plains, Georgia. The Carters hoped to leave the hustle and bustle of politics behind in Washington, but it followed them to Plains. During his presidency, the small towns of Plains, Georgia had other visitors, including protesters from the Ku Klux Klan, Taiwanese activists who protested the normalization of relations with mainland China, and American farm movement tractors protesting U.S. farm policies. And their youngest daughter, Amy Carter, grew up in the White House. During one Plains Christmas, Amy escaped on her bike with a friend when the Secret Service agent assigned to protect her visited the restroom. Amy and her friend skedaddled, parking their bikes out of sight in the bushes, hiding nearby. Her Secret Service agents were waiting when they emerged from hiding. Many of the foreign affairs initiatives affected the celebration of Christmas in the White House. Rosalind Carter promoted welfare of refugees from Vietnam and Cambodia, as tens of thousands crowded in camps in Thailand. In particular, the Iran hostage crisis during the last 2 years of his presidency affected how Christmas was celebrated at the White House. Jimmy Carter remembers, "Bob Hope called to tell me he was planning a trip to Iran so he could entertain the American captives on Christmas Day. I knew his plans were hopeless. Like most people, he underestimated the deep hatred towards America and the militant attitude of Ayatollah Khomeini and those who were holding the prisoners in the American embassy." Jimmy Carter needed to stay in Washington for his last White House Christmas after he lost the 1980 election to Ronald Reagan, since the Iran hostage negotiations were not yet concluded. Our tour guide, when we visited the Carter Presidential Library, discussed the various theories on why the hostages were not released until the opening hours of Reagan's presidency. In December 1980, Algerian delegates in Iran reported that all the prisoners were in good shape, and 42 of the 52 prisoners had sent letters to their folks back home. The Iranians had not interfered with these visits. When he was young, Jimmy Carter had mostly black playmates on his farm before he went to school, and these friendships lasted through his school years and afterwards. At the White House, Amy Carter was the closest to the White House staff, and many of them were minorities as well. Jimmy Carter remembers, "More than any others in our family, Amy was immersed in the lives of the White House staff, spending hours in the kitchen and other places with the cooks, stewards, laundry workers, ushers, maids, butlers, and maintenance men." When I mentioned how empty Camp David seemed, she replied that very few of these loyal workers had ever been to Camp David, although many of them had served in the White House for several decades, and some were approaching retirement. And we agreed with her suggestion to invite all of them to come up and spend Christmas Day with us at Camp David, with no responsibilities at all except that the Filipino stewards already on duty would prepare a festive meal for everybody. Jimmy Carter concludes, "We enjoyed acting as guides, showing off the various cabins, the swimming pool, the bowling alley, the room where we had Sunday religious services, and answering the questions on how the Egyptians and Israelis had lived and worked during the long peace talks at Camp David. After a Christmas dinner of turkey with all the trimmings and individual photographs with each family, we waved goodbye to the buses bringing the White House staff back home. Their visits had turned our potentially lonely Christmas Day into one that we would never forget." And what was Jimmy Carter's best post-White House Christmas? Jimmy Carter remembered the 1991 Christmas involving Curtis Jackson, a black man who was born and spent his early adulthood on the farm of Rosalind's grandfather. After her family retired from farming, Curtis got a job on a sawmill crew. He would get up each morning at 4 o'clock and would walk to the center of Plains, where a logging truck picked him up to go to a large sawmill in Dumas, about 5 miles west of town. During his 7 years working there, Curtis's chainsaw slipped when he was cutting limbs and severed his right leg just above the knees. Now, when he could walk again, Curtis got a job as a handyman at the local nursing home. He worked there another 7 years. Then Rosalind and I hired him to help me attend to our yard and to keep a path cleared around our fish pond. Curtis was a willing worker, always laughing about something. He loved to describe farm life as he remembered it from his boyhood, and some of his stories found their way into Jimmy Carter's reminiscences. Jimmy Carter recalls, "Curtis had a lot of trouble with his wooden leg, so one day we drove to a nearby city where he was fitted with a well-designed prosthesis. For the first time since his accident, he could walk without pain. Now when Curtis's wife, Martha, became ill, we went to visit her. We were appalled at their ramshackle house. It had no heat except a small wood stove. We could see through the walls in several places. There were old buckets sitting around to catch the streams of water that came through the roof when it rained." Curtis says, "It's good on clear nights. We can see the stars from our bed. Some of the sills had rotted out, and the limber floorboards bent down like a trampoline with your weight." The Carters decided that Habitat for Humanity, a charity that they worked with, should build a new home for Curtis and his wife. Normally, Habitat for Humanity asks the future owners to contribute 500 hours of work and pay the full cost of their new house, including materials and labor, although most of the labor was donated by volunteers. Now, since he was handicapped, many of Curtis's neighbors' labor counted towards the requirement. And the zero-interest 20-year mortgage kept Curtis's monthly payments low enough that he could afford to pay them from his Social Security income. Curtis couldn't read or write, so we prepared the papers. There were enough volunteers and planes that they could set Christmas Eve as a target date for the completion of the house. We spent the last 2 days and nights putting on the final touches, laying carpets and tile floors, planting shrubbery, trimming the doors and windows, installing a new stove, refrigerator, and heating system, and hanging paintings on the walls. Our children and grandchildren who came to Plains for Christmas joined us, and we labored until dark on Christmas Eve to complete the multitude of small tasks that always confront builders at the last minute. And now we'll discuss the sources we used for this video. Jimmy Carter's Christmas at Plains also recalls Christmas when the Carters moved away from rural Georgia. This account is a fascinating account of life in rural Georgia during the Depression, including reflections also discussed in his memoirs, An Hour Before Daylight, Memories of a Rural Boyhood. This memoir also includes an account of how sharecropping functioned when the white landowner cared deeply about the welfare of his black tenant farmers. And this memoir also reflects the unintended consequences of FDR's New Deal farm policies, and how these policies often hurt the poorest tenant sharecropper families, and how black and white families coped during the trying times of the Depression. Jimmy Carter's Christmas at Plains also includes memories of the Christmas feasts, how they hunted for some of their meals, and the Carter family recipes. He also has a chapter on how he and his playmates set off fireworks during the holidays, and more differences between how white and black families celebrated Christmas, both at home and at church. He also discussed how he and Rosalind celebrated Christmas when he attended the Naval Academy and during his early years in the Navy, and also some details on how they celebrated Christmas at the White House. And many of these memories are also discussed in his daily devotions, one devotion for each day of the year. There are also many personal stories in our reflections on the autobiography of Jimmy Carter, A Full Life, Reflections at 90. And our tour guide had more personal stories about the Carters when we visited the Carter Presidential Library. We also reflected on Jimmy Carter's The Virtues of Aging. The YouTube description includes a link to our PowerPoint script that we uploaded to SlideShare and also our blog. Please support this channel by sharing this video with your friends and by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons and by clicking on the Amazon links to purchase any of the books we discussed, which will earn us a very small affiliate commission. And please consider becoming a patron of our channel. Plus, we will host special discussion groups for our patrons. Plus, you can click on the Meetup or small M icon to participate in our online discussions, where we practice our future YouTube scripts. And please click on the links for other videos that will broaden your knowledge and improve your soul.